Everyone for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. Today, we are going to be looking at version 26.0 of CloudBeaver Enterprise Edition. So really excited to show you all the new features, and we'll go ahead and get started, and I will share my screen. Okay, so we got that. I'm gonna move this over here. I'm gonna pull this up. Okay, so again, thanks everyone for joining. We're going to go through CloudBeaver Enterprise Edition 26.0. So if you're new to CloudBeaver, new to DBeaver, CloudBeaver is our secure web-based database management platform that gives teams browser access to basically all of your databases that you might be used to using in DBeaver. The difference is that since everything's running on a server, you now get with CloudBeaver centralized administration, granular permissions, a single sign-on integrations, and auditing capabilities, which I'll show you here in a second. Now, CloudBeaver does allow administrators to centrally manage shared connections, projects, or shared and private projects, and then user access. And then it allows developers and analysts to work directly with that data from the browser using a familiar SQL editor and data editor experience. So the first thing that we're going to go through that I'm really excited to show you is the MCP server. So if you're not familiar with that acronym before, or you never heard of that acronym before, MCP, it stands for Model Context Protocol. And what it is it's an open standard that allows AI tools, think of like Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, so like agentic coding tools, AI tools, to securely connect to external systems and applications. So you could use, for example, like just to give you an idea, an MCP server to connect something like Claude Code to Gmail, help you write emails, things of that nature. Now, in this case, it allows AI tools and IDE assistants to securely access your database schema and run queries through your existing CloudBeaver Enterprise connections instead of using direct database credentials. So, for example, if you wanted to connect, say, Claude Code to a database, you might feel a little uneasy about giving your database credentials, username, password to Claude Code. And I'd be willing to bet, if you actually did give those credentials to Claude Code, it might even give you like a little warning, like, hey, go ahead and don't actually send me that or reset those permissions since you shared them, things like that. So now with CloudBeaver Enterprise, you can have that secure authentication that you're already trusting CloudBeaver with at that auth level. You're just passing those that permission and that schema to the MCP server. So what that means is that the AI can see your actual tables, columns, relationships that exist in CloudBeaver Enterprise while still respecting all the permissions and access controls that you already configured. So let's go ahead and kind of show you what I mean. So I've got my CloudBeaver Enterprise edition stood up. Again, with CloudBeaver Enterprise, you can have a private connection, or rather a private project that only you see. And then you can also have a shared project that you're kind of collaborating with your other teammates on. And so I've got this private project, and the two connections that we're going to be kind of concerned with are going to be this SQL Server connection. It's called AdventureWorks because it's got this like AdventureWorks company data on it. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Query Manager database, which we've made some enhancements to. Now, the way that we set these up is I'm going to go ahead, and if you're already familiar with CloudBeaver, then you might be familiar with these settings, but I'm going to go ahead into my admin settings. I'm going to go to administration. I'm going to go to server configuration, and then you're going to see this feature here that says AI MCP server. You're going to turn that on, and then once that's on, like I said, you've already got your databases stood up. And then what you could do is you can go ahead and you can edit this connection. And then there is if you scroll to the right, there's a little button that says, or a tab that says AI. And then you're going to go ahead and enable that MCP connection. And then it's going to give you an MCP endpoint. I'll show you what we're going to do with that here in a second. And then it even gives you MCP configuration snippets. So we've got one for Cursor, VS Code, Claude Code, and Zed, just to name a few. But you're not limited to just those configurations, and I'll even show you a different one while I'm at it. Now, once I have that information, I can go ahead into my coding agent. For me, that's going to be Codex. Codex has a config file, and then I've got that config file here. I'm just showing you my VS Code. And so you can see I've got my model set up, I've got my reasoning effort set up, and I've got my personality set up. Those are kind of native to ChatGPT/Codex. And then what I do is I'm going to enable my connection. So for me, that's going to be this SQL Server connection for that AdventureWorks database. And then here's where I'm going to enter that MCP connection. But for the other coding agents, it might look similar, might look a little bit different, but the key factor is going to be that URL for the endpoint that I pulled from DBeaver over here in the connection settings. And then the other tool the other credential that I need is this MCP token. Now I have it saved as a variable, so I'm not hard coding anything into my config file. And then what I can do is I can go in, where I get that is I go into my user profile, click on cpadmin. There's this button or this token or this tab that says API token. And then I can create a new API token and then set the expiration date. And then all I have to do is set that variable in my terminal. And then, oops, let me just get that. Go. So I set that variable in my API token, and then now I've got that all set up, that all squared away. Then oops, get rid of that. Get rid of that. Sorry, folks. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see what that does. So you can see I've got my database set up. So if I go into like my AdventureWorks database, you can see I've got different views. I've got a bunch of different schemas. So this is, again, like a faux company I'm running. And so I've got like these sales tables. I've got all this different logic in this schema. And so, for example, let's say I'm a C-suite executive and I want to like understand a little bit more about my business, the context of my business. What I can do if I'm not using the MCP server is I can, come into CloudBeaver Enterprise, and I could go ahead and I can run a SQL script. If I'm a SQL expert, then I'm kind of limited to what I know in SQL. But then if I'm not, I still have the AI assistant, and you could see. So I've got my AI assistant. I said, show me my highest spend AdventureWorks customers. Ran that, and now I've got this. This context. And this is helpful. I mean, if I don't know the customer ID, I'd have to go look for that. I could make it so that I could do a join, but you could tell it's a little bit single threaded to do it that way. So what the MCP server does is it just gives me, again, like an agentic way to get this context. And so just to save a little bit of time, I've already kind of written out the prompt that I wanted to. I'll see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. And so I said, pretend I'm a C-suite executive, give me some insights about my AdventureWorks business. And then once I have that set up, it's got some really rich context. So it worked for 39 seconds, and you can see it ran, I could see the queries that it ran. So if I go in here, I can see that it ran this query for me. I can see it ran, let's see, some other queries. So it ran, if we counted, it ran 9 queries in 39 seconds. So it's already saving me time. So I'm not even having to think about what those follow-up queries might be. It's just contextualizing all of that for me based on the model context protocol. And so once I did that, I'm using Codex. So it's using ChatGPT, GPT 5.5. And then it's giving me this executive readout, which is really, really rich analysis. So it tells me, hey, revenue peaked in 2013, then fell sharply in 2014. Gives me my order number, my revenue total, average order value. I mean, this is all different like SQL executions that I'd have to run through. And then it told me basically that I have this channel mix in terms of my customers. So I've got my stores and my businesses that were responsible for my orders, 3,800 orders, and then with online making up 2,700 orders, even though revenue was higher in the stores than it was online. And then if I keep scrolling, it'll actually give me a little bit of like, so I've got my profit margins. So I've got Australia was my highest profit margin. Looks like the Southwest was my lowest profit margin. And then we've got some broad level takeaways. And one of the biggest takeaways, if I'm like a C-suite executive, then I might want to know if there's like opportunities for, you know, higher profitability. And then one of the insights that it gave me some like high level insights. And then it tells me there's likely cross-sell opportunity for my high margin accessories. So basically what it's telling me is that I've got these bikes that I'm selling. The bikes are kind of low margin, but then I've got accessories. So I've got clothes, I've got parts. And then what I could do is I should try to attach things like clothing accessories to my bike purchases to increase profitability. So some really rich analysis, and you know, for our money at a really competitive price point. I will go ahead and pause there. I see that we've got the chat open, so just wanted to check. Does anyone have any questions, maybe on how I set that up? What kind of analysis that you can get? Feel free to use the chat. Feel free to come off mute. If you have any questions, I'll just pause there for a second. Okay, and I'll just keep plugging along here. So that's the MCP server, and in a second, I'll show you live what other context we can get. For now, though, I'm going to switch to one of the other new features that we added in CloudBeaver, and that is going to be, exit out of here. That is going to be the audit logging. So again, everything runs through CloudBeaver through the server. And so one of the new features that we have is this concept of audit logging. So audit logging provides a trace of basically important activity that's happening inside CloudBeaver Enterprise. So that includes authentication events, connection management, configuration changes, SQL execution, file operations, and other user activity. Now, this is especially useful for organizations that need stronger governance, compliance visibility, or operational auditing. And now this feature is disabled by default. So let's go ahead and check out how we enable that. So I'll go ahead and I'll go into administration. And then we'll go to the audit logging, or rather, how do we enable it? Administration logger. And then here's where we turn on the audit logging capabilities. And then if you're already familiar with CloudBeaver, you'll know that we have this query manager. And so the query manager is basically an internal database that logs all the queries that are happening on your database. And then the same kind of concept applies for the audit logging. So it's basically pulling the DBeaver, or rather CloudBeaver API. So I can see when there was a post. I can see that, for example, that the post was made to the default navigator settings. It was made at 519. So you've got all this information. You can export this information to, for example, like a observability tool if you wanted to see what's going on. But I'll show you something else cool that we can do with audit logging capabilities. So what we can do is we can actually plug into the CloudBeaver database using CloudBeaver. So we're getting a little bit meta. But then I can come in here and I can see like all of the activity that's going on the database. So I can see these access tokens, these auth attempts. And then just to give you an example of the kind of insights that you can get both from the audit logger and from your MCP server, I'm plugged into my MCP server, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. And then I can come in here and I can say, can you give me some insights about my QM database for CloudBeaver? Let's see what it comes up with. Giving me some idea of what it's doing. So we're going to query the CloudBeaver QM database. It's going to run a SQL script. And then it's just rerouting because there's something going on. And then we're looking for current volumes, maybe some data source activity, performance. Let's do that. Okay, and then let's see what kind of insights we got. So we've got, basically it's telling me that this is like an audit observability store for CloudBeaver. We've got some QM tables. We got 6 users, 260 sessions, 3,200 events. My CB admin is my most active user. We've got 76 different connections in the CloudBeaver database, 62 different connections in the AdventureWorks database. I had 30 connections to this like airline data that I was looking at. And then I can see all the different queries that I ran. So I ran 1,000 different queries against AdventureWorks, almost 300 queries against Oracle. So some pretty interesting insights. I can see what the average query execution time was. So I could see the Google BigQuery was a little bit slower than that one's like actually in Europe, so that makes sense compared to my, for example, my query manager database, which I'm hosting locally. So some really interesting insights you can get. I could ask it about like my AI token usage from the AI assistant. I could ask it who my most important users are, perhaps in CloudBeaver. You could ask it like, for example, who are some of my less active users. And again, just get some really interesting insights that way. I'll go ahead and pause once again. Does anyone have any questions, any quick questions they want to drop in the chat, or any questions about, again, the MCP server or about the audit logging that's going on in CloudBeaver? And if not, I'll go ahead and continue along. Check one more time. All right, looks good. So a couple more enhancements that we'll talk about with CloudBeaver. So we're going to look at some of the data editor enhancements. So these are more workflow focused changes that improve usability for people working with large data sets directly in the browser. And the first update is going to be for undo and redo support. So let's go ahead and see what I mean by that. So I'll go ahead and look at this table that I generated with the AI assistant. I'll go ahead and make some changes to this data. And then let's say that I actually didn't want to make those changes to the data. So what we can do is we can actually undo this. So if I wanted to, I could just start like clicking, and you can see just by one keystroke, if I was changing like multiple cells at a time, then it would change those cells. And then I could go ahead and just like that, I could back up. If I wanted to redo those changes, I could redo those changes. And then the last 50 actions are retained across the data editor, result sets, and related panels. The next feature I'll jump to is called use local formatting. So with this setting, users can choose how to display numbers and dates using the operating system locale, a custom locale, or keeping these values on formatting. So what does that look like in practice? So I've got these values here that are dates, and you can see it's kind of written in, I'm using, for example, I'm using American English. So we've got the month first, then we've got the day, then we've got the year. So what I can do is I can come into my own personal settings. I can go to preferences, and then there's this feature that says use locale formatting. And then what I can do is I can change that. Let's change it to German, for example, save that. And then now you can see it's got the date first, then the month, or rather the day first, then the month, then the year. So the idea is that somebody in America can look at the settings based on like American conventions. Somebody in German can look at it based on German conventions. So you can just basically change the way to format those displayed values. The next feature we'll talk about is column pinning. So, you're probably used to this in something like Excel, but what I could do is I've got this sales order ID. I can scroll here, but let's say I wanted to pin that column. I can go ahead and pin that column, and now the ID stays while I move back and forth. I can go ahead and then pin that. And then one of the other features that we have is the ability to automatically generate insert, select, delete, and update statements for selected values in a cell, plus a status indicator in the top left corner that explains the table editability. So let's go ahead and see what I mean by that. Let's go back to my my sales data, since that's a little contextualized. Let's say I wanted to delete the values that are in this customer ID property. I can come in here, generate SQL. Let's delete it by the unique key, and then you can see it gives me the SQL. I can copy that to the editor and run that. But now it gives me the values from a SQL perspective to delete that cell value. I could do, for example, if I wanted to insert into that column, it'll give me the insert value. So pretty handy there. Any questions on either of those features? Looks good. If not, I will keep moving along. And then the next thing we'll look at is our SQL editor improvements. So one of the biggest additions is going to be support for parameters and variables in queries. So this is going to allow users to create usable SQL queries where values can be supplied dynamically at execution time. For example, instead of hard coding a customer ID or a date range, I can define variables in the query, and I can provide variables when I run it. So what does that look like? Let's go ahead and go to a different query. And this is going to be for that AdventureWorks database, which again is like a sales database, company database. And so if we look at this query that I wrote, we've got select the department ID, the name, the group name, the modified date from my AdventureWorks database. And then the two parameters that we have are going to be this group name and this department name. And then what I could do is if I execute this query, it's going to give me the opportunity to actually bind these parameters. And so then you can see when I start typing, let's give this department name, we'll call it, we can just call it the sales department. And then you can see it's giving me a preview of what the query is going to look like. And then I could do this group name. We could call it, what's the word I'm looking for? We'll call this sales performers. There we go. And then you can see it's giving me the parameters down there. So really, really neat. Now you can run parameterized queries in CloudBeaver. And then it just gave me the error because I didn't actually go through with the execution. And then the last feature I will show you is this drop statement warning. So this is in my Oracle database. And then basically in this Oracle database, I've got this profits view. And then if I want to, I can select drop or write a query, drop view if exists, profits. And then I'll go ahead and execute that. And then basically what it does is it just gives me an error warning when I'm going to do a drop statement. So just a nice little feature. Again, you could, as you saw, you can turn that off if you want. But it's just putting one thing in front of perhaps an error that you might make, so that you don't maybe drop something by mistake or something to that effect. So that is everything I wanted to show today. To summarize the major CloudBeaver Enterprise 26.0 updates, we looked at the MCP server integration for AI tools and IDE assistance. We reviewed the new audit logging capabilities and saw how you can even use the MCP server with those audit logs to generate some insights about your DBeaver, or rather CloudBeaver installation. We explored the data editor enhancements like undo/redo, column pinning, formatting controls, and then generated SQL. And then we covered the SQL editor improvements just now, like reusable parameters, the SQL preview for those parameters, and then dangerous query protections. So overall, CloudBeaver Enterprise continues to provide organizations with a secure, centralized, and browser-based data management platform with strong governance and collaboration capabilities. Now, with the MCP support and the enhanced auditing, also becomes a much stronger platform for organizations adopting AI-assisted workflows more securely. So we'll share links to the CloudBeaver Enterprise page, documentation, release notes, and then also our website and social media channels. And then we do have some time left over for some Q&A. So if anyone has any questions on anything they saw, or if you have any questions on DBeaver in general that I might be able to ask, again, this is Zach Antunes. I'm a solutions architect here at DBeaver, so happy to answer any questions about this or any other DBeaver questions you might have. And I'll go ahead and just give it a minute if anyone has any questions.